Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 1644. The topic is training and the title is Blending Proper Technique with Full Intensity. Okay, so I'll start with one of my clients. They're a business client. They own a gym and they have a couple trainers that work for them, and we're working together just to kind of help bring in more money and kind of organize what they're doing so that way they could just make more money and help more people. And one of the things we did recently was working with the trainers at the facility with the owner. We're trying to create like templates that they can use, all the trainers can use, have more streamlined training, spend less time actually writing the programming and more time just like personalizing it. So the trainers were expressing that it was just really confusing and overwhelming to do everything, to do the nutrition and training, and they wanted a common place to start from and something that kind of did a lot of the work for them. So we created all that, and that's what we're working on now. We did a group Zoom chat with myself, the owner, and the other trainers, and a question that came up that I thought would make a good podcast. So one of the trainers said that they had built their physique by training like really high intensity, super high intensity, but they had some injuries along the way. And they asked, how do you balance keeping your clients safe while also pushing their limits so they continue to grow, so they don't plateau? Well, a couple things. Like one of the first things we talked about was nutrition. So prior to us talking, they weren't doing anything nutrition-wise with their clients, and that was going to be a huge issue because your overall training volume, and that it would include kind of intensity, is going to, if you're wanting it to be proper, you're wanting it to be optimal, it has to be modified based on the client's nutrition and sleep. Like their ability to recover from training is going to dictate how much you can train. So if you don't optimize their nutrition, you're not going to be able to optimize their training, so you might be pushing them into training that they can't recover from, or you're just suboptimally training, suboptimally recovering, and just suboptimal results. You get plateaued. So us working on nutrition is going to be a huge component for them. But we also talked about a specific way to organize the client's working sets and like the sets that the trainer takes their clients through. So what we said for each exercise is there are practice sets, technique sets, and intensity sets. So this is just terminology we used in the conversation. And you would modify the weight and reps of each of those sets for each individual. So what does this mean? Is when you introduce an exercise to somebody, you have to practice it. Now, that would also be, you could also phrase that as a warm-up set. So those are typically sub-maximal in weight or reps. So if I'm going to do a chest press and I want to get to, say I'm trying to get somebody to 40 pounds, I might have them do 20 pounds for 5 to 10 reps, 30 pounds for 5 to 10 reps, and then we're at our working set, okay, around 40 pounds. So each exercise, there's going to be one or two kind of warm-up or practice sets. The reason why we were using practice was that if the client is already warm, if you're on the third or fourth or fifth exercise for the workout, saying they need to warm up doesn't really make sense because they're sweating their butt off. They're warm enough. So what you're really doing is you're practicing. Now, technique sets, or we define them as different than practice sets because practice sets are sub-maximal. You're just introducing a little bit of weight, introducing a few reps, you're just introducing the movement. Now, when you get to working sets, or top sets, we said that for most exercises, most of the time, this is all general, just for the concepts, and you can apply it more specifically to yourself. But for most people, they do 3 to 4 top sets. We typically would refer to those as working sets. So there's warm-up sets and working sets. You can also say it as practice sets and top sets. So the terminology, kind of interchangeable. Now our top sets, if we do 3 to 4 top sets, when we're at our top set, we would choose to do technique sets or intensity sets. A technique set would be a set that you are doing with maximal weight, maximal effort, but you stop before there's any technique breakdown. Now, if you're using like RPE, which is rate of perceived exertion, or an RIR, reps in reserve, there's like 4 million like terminologies that you can use to control intensity. But what this would be is you go right to the edge of what your technique can do, but you don't let technique break down. So that might be an RPE of, 8, maybe an RIR of like 1 to 2 reps in reserve. So you could do another rep or two strength-wise, but you don't know if the technique would be good or not. So you stop. That's the idea of a technique set. Maximal weight, and you're going for as many reps as you can do with the weight in the rep range that you want, but you're going to like 1 or 2 reps short of maybe true like failure. You're trying to stay with just the reps that look good. So those are technique sets. Intensity sets would be I'm just going to try to do maximal weight, maximal reps, and if my technique breaks down, oh well. Now, I might only break down 1 or 2 reps because then I know if I continue to try to do more, I can get injured. But if you do like 1 rep and it's a little wobbly, but you feel okay enough to try another one, you go ahead and try another one. So intensity sets are all out. RPE 10. Reps in reserve 0. You just go for it. So we were saying that what you do with your top sets would be on a client-by-client basis, but they can think between choosing, the trainers can think between choosing between a technique set or an intensity set. So what does the client need? So for example, if they're a true beginner, they probably need all technique sets. So if you think about a beginner trying to do a dumbbell chest press, you're not going to go full intensity because they can drop the dumbbell on their face because they have no stabilizational skills yet or stabilizational strength. You're not going to go to technique breakdown because it's either good technique or they get hurt. There's no gray. There's no middle area. So a true beginner, you're probably looking at all technique sets. Now, as they become more familiar with movements, their stabilization of movements are better, their coordination for movements are better, and maybe they move on from a beginner stage to like an intermediate stage. Somebody has done workouts before. You're working with somebody who's worked out for a couple years in the gym. They still don't necessarily know what they're doing, but they've been around the gym before. So you might, I'm going to do a couple practice sets, then on my top sets, I might do 1 to 2 technique sets, then maybe end with 1 intensity set. So I'm having them do 2 sets where we stop like short of technique breakdown, but then the last set, we kind of let them go for it. Because they have some stability control, they have some understanding of, not twisting their spine, not losing joint stability. They understand how to push their intensity, but still maintain proper positioning, right? Whereas advanced athletes, you might just do intensity sets. So maybe you do a couple practice sets, and then we talked about in a recent podcast, we talked about a potentiation set. What in the hell that is. But a potentiation set is podcast 1636. So like a weekish ago. Podcast 1636. It's where you go up to the weight you would want to use for your working sets, but you just do 2 or 3 reps, just sub-maximal rep range. So if I want to go up and I want to do 100-pound dumbbells for 10 reps, I might, do 60s for 5, 80s for 5. I might get the 100s, do them for 3 or 4 reps. So that way I got the weight acceptance into my muscles, my joints, my nervous system kind of is ready. And then I take a big long rest and I go for the 100s for full effort. So in a more advanced client, you might just do practice sets and then right to your intensity sets. They're so familiar with the movements that their intensity sets actually include great technique control. So you don't need sub-maximal intensity to practice technique because they already have really good technique. So the idea of thinking of your top sets as practice sets, technique sets, and intensity sets, like those kind of blended sets. I think it's kind of a fun conversation to have. And when I was talking with these clients that are actually trainers, they all loved the idea because it gave in their mind a clear idea of what to do. If they have a beginner client, they don't have to worry about pushing intensity because the person just needs technique. When they have somebody who's familiar with lifting and maybe they're a little plateaued, Then maybe you want to do 1 or 2 technique sets and then maybe just 1 intensity set. So I went through and I also gave them examples from my training, like when I train clients. So if I have somebody who's a true beginner, I remember and I have like hundreds of these stories, but one client, for example, she came in and had never worked out before. She was in her 60s, wanted to build muscle to support her joints and counter some arthritic issues. So I was like, well, we can put you in like a chest press machine, but if it does all the stabilization and bracing for you, that's not going to build all the finer, smaller muscles around the joints, which, if they're strong and developed, can help reduce some of the arthritis you're feeling because it takes pressure off the joints. And then also, when you're moving around in regular life, you're going to want those stability muscles. If you're, putting boxes up in the attic, you're putting things up and down off shelves, I said you're going to want some of those stabilization muscles. So why don't we take the time, let's talk about how to do a dumbbell chest press, and let's actually work on that. So we did practice sets, and then all of our top sets were just technique sets. We didn't go to failure. The whole idea was, when she was going to extend her arms at the top, she constantly was like picking up her shoulders and overextending. So we talked about the need to kind of keep the shoulders pulled together towards each other so they're stable on the bench. So we had so many technical aspects to work on. We never did any high intensity sets, and we didn't need to. Like at first, it was just learning the coordination of the movements. So that would be an example where somebody who's a true beginner, that all your top sets are going to be technique sets, and that's okay. It's going to help build the control that we're looking for, and it helps build confidence. They feel more confident because they think they can do it right. So they're going to be so focused on doing everything perfectly that trying to push them to an intensity set not only can that risk injury because they have no control and there's very little leeway between something being good and really bad, it's also just going to mess up their confidence because they'll feel that the technique isn't good and then they're going to think they messed it up. So when somebody's a true beginner, it's probably better to do all technique sets as your top sets. Now, we have an example, say somebody's plateaued. They've been lifting for a while, but they're kind of plateaued. They're not really sure what to do. They just aren't making the results, like the progress that they wanted. Typically, they tend to fall into one of 2 categories. They either are trying to lift everything too perfectly and they don't have enough intensity, or they're way too damn intense and their technique is absolute crap. So one past client I remember specifically, she was sending me videos, and I said, well, work up to like maybe a heavy squat, like for a set of like 3. And it looked like she just did like 1, 2, 3, stop. And I asked her, I said, well, was that as heavy as you could go? And she said, yes. And in my mind, I'm like, that was the wrong word. Like, no, should have been the answer. Like, you can do more weight. I was like, do you not realize you can do more? And as we were talking, she was such a perfectionist that if she felt any nuance, absolutely any nuance of the technique being slightly off, she stopped because she thought that was bad technique. So we had to start talking and say, hey, there's a little wiggle room here where we need to push a little bit into small variances. If you have 5 toes on each foot, most of us, if you have 20% of your pressure on each individual toe, and let's say in the middle of the squat, you shift, there's now 30% on your big toe, only 10% of pressure on your pinky toe. That's okay. We're going to keep going. I said, I want you to try to push back out on the pinky toe. But I mean, hell, if your foot's staying on the ground and it's not totally caving in, there's no ankle caving, there's no knee caving, and the technique looks clean enough, it's like we need you to push a little bit harder into that. So we talked about that, and she's actually started making huge progress. We've been working together for a couple of years now, and enormous progress. And that's what actually was holding her back, was she was so worried about everything being perfect that she never pushed her body to any stimulus they had to adapt to. She would always stop just where her body could do it. Another example, I was just training the other day. I had to go up to Charlotte, and I was training at a big commercial gym. There was a guy in there doing bicep curls that, oh, for the love of God, I wish I could have just been like, bro, take a breath, calm down, sit down. Let me just show you a couple things. The reason why I don't do that is typically that's received poorly. Everybody thinks they're a freaking genius, and saying that as like a smartass, because I don't even like people telling me what to do. I have had people tell me what to do, by the way. It's always older men, like they'll like in their 60s and 70s, and they're like, you get bigger arms if you slow down a little bit. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing? So, I need to check my ego every now and then. Sure, I'm sure, but it's just typically if you try to help people and they didn't ask you, it doesn't go as well as you think it will. But this guy was doing bicep curls. His arms were like not very big. There wasn't really any muscle to them, and he was throwing around 50-pound dumbbells on seated bicep curls. And I was like, for the love of God, you're going to rip your arm out of socket. And then he stood and did easy bar curls, and he had 45-pound plate on each side of an easy bar curl, and was basically dry humping the bar in the middle of the gym. And I just felt so bad. I'm like, oh, dude, like you're not building muscle, not because you're not going heavy enough. It's because you're not using any of the actual muscle you want to grow. So it's like, so he had all the intensity in the world, but no technique. So when somebody's plateaued, I typically look to say, okay, which of the two are they missing? If they have all the intensity in the world, but they have no technique, then now all of a sudden our top sets need to be more towards technique top sets. If somebody's perfect, they want everything to be absolutely perfect, they don't ever push far enough into intensity, then you start introducing intensity sets. Another example, very advanced athletes I get to work with, very fun, like elite level powerlifter, and if they're having like there's one powerlifter, elite level powerlifter has knee pain, and when they sent me their squat and deadlift, they're perfect, as they should be because they're elite level. And I was like, well, those aren't the issues. So I said, can you send me some other stuff? And we talked about some of their accessories, and they sent me videos of their accessories, and their accessories were like they were trying to murder the weight. And they were moving 1,000,000 miles an hour. Everything was way too heavy and way too aggressive. And I was like, okay, here we go. This is it. So I was like, we got to slow all this stuff down, and we have to actually pay attention to what the muscles are doing. So if we're doing hamstring curls, we're not trying to rip the machine apart. Let's try not to rip the leg machine apart as we try to do a hamstring curl. So I said, I want you to do 3-count concentric and a 3-count eccentric. They sent me the video, and if they had counted to 3, I don't know how they did it. It would have been like 1 to 3, 1 to 3, 1 to 3, 1 to 3. And that was how fast they were moving. I was like, okay, let's try a 30-count concentric and eccentric. But I joked with them, and I said, I just want you to count like actual seconds, not just how fast can you say the words 1, 2, 3. So they sent me new videos, and I was like, here we go. This is it. And we've been working together, and they're no pain whatsoever now. They were just trying to murder their accessories. They were way too intense. So we had to drop their accessories down. So their main lifts were fine, but the accessories were way too intense and didn't have enough technique. But I've also worked with really high-level bodybuilders. I've helped people get pro cards, and they're not aggressive enough. They're too slow, too controlled. And I'm like, hey, we're doing this exercise in a 10 to 20 second like time under tension range to build strength. You're just moving too perfectly, too slowly. We want to use a little bit more intensity here. You're used to soaking everything into the muscle, and the muscle just gets absolutely destroyed. I want you to actually work on a little bit of efficiency. I want you to bring other muscles into the movement and actually see how smoothly you can move this weight rather than trying to isolate and murder a singular muscle. So I was like, let's work on a little bit of efficiency. Let's work on moving with a little bit of momentum, and let's actually try to increase your intensity, and that'll increase your strength, and that'll help you past your plateau that you're having. So it's really a lot of individual basis as to what would be best. But if we know that the components are there, practice sets, technique sets, and intensity sets, then we can kind of modify those components as we need per client. So I thought that was fun to talk about as a way to blend proper technique with full intensity is you do a couple practice sets, also known as warm-up sets. And then on your top sets, you might want to do 1 to 2 technique sets where you stop 1 or 2 reps short of failure. But then your 1 or 2 final top sets should be the intensity sets where you push all the way to technique failure. So that would be a good way to blend proper technique and full intensity. Okay, well, hopefully that was helpful. I thought that was kind of a fun discussion. So if you have any follow-up questions, reach out. My email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. Always here, always happy to help. I love these kind of conversations, so if you have any questions, let me know. If you like our podcast, please share it. The more people we share it with, the more people can help. That's the whole point of the podcast, just help people live their healthiest and happiest life. Thank you to those who donate to support the podcast. I truly appreciate it, as it just helps cover some of the high costs, the hosting costs and whatnot. So I really appreciate that. If you want to donate, you can do so on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. Even just $5 a month, even any little bit, it helps a lot. So thank you very much to those that do that. I really do appreciate it. We all appreciate it, because now we can have this podcast every day. If you like the information we share in our podcast, you can always find more from me on social media. I post on Instagram all the time, and YouTube not so much, but I still do have the channel. So find us and follow us under the name Brutal Iron Gym if you want more and different information. Find us and follow us on Instagram, absolutely, and then YouTube as well. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.